The rain had started falling just before dawn, that soft kind of drizzle that seems to blanket the city in quiet introspection. People rushed by under umbrellas, some balancing coffee cups and phones in one hand, while others tucked themselves deeper into oversized coats. The bell above the door of Cloverbean Cafe chimed softly as it opened, letting in a gust of cool morning air, and a man in a dark hoodie, his face partially obscured by the shadow of a well-worn cap. His shoes were expensive but muddy, and he paused for a second, just enough to survey the place like someone stepping into a memory they didn't know they had. Inside, Cloverbean was already buzzing, not with customers, but with the unique chaos of a morning setup. Bags of fresh beans were being stacked behind the counter, muffins were being lined up in the display case, and someone was yelling over the hiss of steaming milk about a missing delivery crate. The air smelled of cinnamon and espresso, and the walls, adorned with local art and string lights, gave the cafe a lived-in charm that had nothing to do with its Yelp rating. Behind the counter, 19-year-old Casey Morgan was in full triage mode. Hair tied up in a loose bun, sleeves rolled to her elbows, she darted between the espresso machine and the register like a seasoned battlefield medic. Her boss had called in sick again, and 2 of her co-workers had simply failed to show up. She didn't have time to panic, not when she had regulars who relied on their morning mocha to function. And besides, today was rent day. Tips were not a bonus, they were survival. She barely looked up when the hooded man approached the counter. "You must be the new guy," she said, breathless, as she handed a flat white to a man on the go. "Perfect timing. Grab an apron from the hook back there and wash your hands. I need you on register. I'll show you how to do the pour-over later." The man blinked, clearly caught off guard. Casey misread his silence as shyness. "Look, I get it, first day nerves and all. But you'll be fine. Just ring him up and smile like you mean it. People don't come here for precision. They come here for warmth." And just like that, Elon Musk found himself standing behind the counter of a cafe he had never heard of, mistaken for a new hire he never applied to be. He could have corrected her. He could have laughed, pulled off his cap, and revealed who he was, the man who ran empires and launched rockets into the stars. But instead, something made him pause. Something in her voice. It wasn't just urgency, it was resilience. She didn't have time for games, and oddly, neither did he. So instead of correcting her, he stepped toward the apron hook and pulled one down. It was too small. It smelled of espresso and something faintly floral. It made him look ridiculous, but oddly, he didn't care. By the time Casey turned back around, he was at the register. "Okay," she said, eyebrows raised. "Not bad, new guy. What's your name again?" He hesitated. "Eli," he said on impulse. She nodded. "All right, Eli. Let's see what you got." And so began the strangest morning of Elon Musk's life. Customers began trickling in. Casey taught him the basics in 30 seconds flat, how to punch in orders, how to pretend the machine wasn't glitching when it clearly was, and how to hand over the change with a smile. Elon was awkward at first, his fingers fumbling with the touchscreen, his responses delayed. But he listened, really listened, and soon the motion started to feel oddly natural. A little girl with red rain boots and a stuffed bear ordered a hot chocolate. Elon crouched slightly to be at her eye level and asked her the bear's name. "Captain Pickles," she said solemnly. "He's not allergic to marshmallows." Elon grinned. "Well, Captain Pickles is getting the deluxe treatment today." Casey noticed the exchange and gave him an approving nod. 2 elderly women came in next, regulars by the way they greeted Casey. "Try not to overcharge them," she teased Eli with a smirk. "They tip in wisdom." By mid-morning, the rain had stopped and the cafe had settled into a rhythm. Casey finally took a breath, wiping her hands on a towel. "You're weirdly good at this," she said. "You sure this is your first barista gig?" Elon shrugged, playing along. "I've served people in other ways. This one's definitely the messiest." They both laughed, and for a second, the world outside seemed to quiet. It was just a cafe, a storm-cleared morning, and 2 strangers wrapped in the accidental comfort of unexpected company. Casey's eyes softened as she glanced toward the window, where the light had begun to warm the hardwood floors. Most people wouldn't have stuck around, she said, almost to herself. Especially not with that look on your face when I barked orders at you. Elon tilted his head. What look? Like you just stepped out of a boardroom and into a different planet. He chuckled. Maybe I did. By the time the lunch crowd started to pick up, Elon had memorized the difference between a macchiato and a cordido, figured out the espresso machine's temperamental quirks, and even learned how to fake confidence with a scanner that only worked when you whispered sweet nothings to it. Casey, now slightly less frantic, but still moving like she was operating on a 2x speed setting, tossed him a half-smile as she handed off another to-go order and brushed a wisp of hair from her face. "You're not terrible," she said, which, coming from her, was clearly a compliment. "I'll take that as glowing praise," Elon replied, brushing a smudge of milk foam off his hoodie with a flick. Casey leaned on the counter for a brief moment, catching her breath. "You've got this weird thing about you," she said, squinting at him. "Like, you don't quite belong here, but at the same time, it's like you chose to be." He chuckled, amused by how close she was to the truth. "Maybe I'm just looking for something different." "Aren't we all?" she muttered, half under her breath, before pushing herself upright again. "Watch the front for a second. I gotta run to the back and deal with the oat milk apocalypse." As she disappeared behind the swinging door, Elon took a moment to breathe. For once, no one was asking him about Mars or deadlines or earnings reports. He wasn't a CEO here. He was just Eli, the guy in the hoodie who might mess up your change, but would do it with a smile. The simplicity of it hit him like a soft wave, a moment of peace he hadn't expected but was oddly grateful for. That's when an older man with a gray beard and sketchpad stepped up to the counter. "You're new," the man said, not asking. "Guilty," Elon replied. "You have the look of someone who's seen a lot of things, but still decided to show up here." Elon smiled faintly. "I guess I just wanted to see what would happen if I did." The man nodded approvingly and ordered a cappuccino with cinnamon. Before leaving, he added, "If you ever need someone to sketch your soul, I'm here every Tuesday." And just like that, he was gone. By the time Casey returned, Elon was handing a latte to a college student in headphones and giving directions to a couple of tourists who thought Clover Bean was a jazz bar. She watched him for a beat longer than necessary, something softening in her face. "Okay, Eli," she said, "you're officially promoted to not a disaster. I might even trust you with the French press next time." He grinned, and they both laughed. It was a light kind of laughter, genuine, unscripted, and the kind that echoed longer than it should have. But before they could share anything else, the front door burst open with a gust of wind and a dramatic clatter of bells. In walked a tall man in a rumpled dress shirt and wet loafers, looking confused and mildly irritated. "I'm looking for the manager," he barked, scanning the room. Casey stepped forward. "She's not here today. Can I help?" "I was supposed to drop off supplies. Where's your delivery log?" Elon watched as Casey's posture shifted instantly, her shoulders straightening, her voice turning colder. "We didn't receive a log, and we weren't told you were coming. If you leave the invoice, I'll make sure she gets it." The man sighed dramatically and tossed a crumpled slip on the counter. "Typical," he muttered. Casey said nothing. She just stared at the paper until he left, her jaw set tight. Elon noticed the change in her, the calm shell cracking, something brewing beneath it. He waited until the door shut behind the delivery guy. "You all right?" he asked gently. She nodded, but it was the kind of nod that meant no. "Just tired," she said. "This place, it's a lot sometimes." He didn't push. He just stood beside her in quiet solidarity. And maybe that's what made her open up, even just a little. "My mom used to work here before she passed. I sort of inherited the shift leadership by accident. It's not glamorous, but it's something I can hold on to." Elon looked at her, not with pity, but with the kind of understanding that comes from carrying invisible weights too. "You hold it together well," he said. "Only because I have to," she replied. The air between them shifted, an unspoken acknowledgement that sometimes showing up was the bravest thing a person could do. They returned to their work in a kind of quiet harmony, each gesture carrying more meaning than it did an hour ago. Two people from entirely different worlds, brought together by a mix-up and a morning that refused to go as planned. Hey, quick pause. If you've been enjoying this story so far, you're probably someone who likes stories that feel real, even when they're unexpected. If that's you, maybe hit that subscribe button, not because everyone says so, but because stories like this are just getting started. And if you're curious about what's coming next, well, so are we. All right, let's get back to it. The rain returned in the early afternoon, not as a light drizzle this time, but with the steady rhythm of 1,000 soft drum beats tapping on the cafe's front windows. Customers lingered longer than usual, drawn in by the scent of fresh-baked banana bread and the comfort of steaming mugs. Conversations were quieter, deeper, like the weather had pulled some curtain back between strangers and let them speak more freely. Casey moved more slowly now, her energy dimmed by hours on her feet and the emotional heaviness of the morning. Yet she carried on with the same quiet determination, as though the chaos around her was background noise to a mission only she understood. Elon had offered to take over the counter while she took a break, but she had simply shaken her head. "If I stop now, I'll melt into the floor," she said, managing a tired grin. He didn't press, but he watched. He noticed the way she held her shoulder, slightly stiff, probably from lifting crates too heavy for her frame. He noticed the way she bit the inside of her cheek when numbers didn't line up on the receipts, and how she smiled at customers even when her eyes clearly wanted to close. She wasn't just running a cafe. She was holding her life together in plain sight, one espresso shot at a time. A lull came around 2:15, rare and fleeting, and Elon took the opportunity to wipe down the counter. It was oddly therapeutic. The sound of a damp cloth on polished wood, the faint whir of a grinder in the background, and the soft hum of a playlist that someone had forgotten to turn off shuffle mode. Suddenly, a voice broke through. "You're not really new here, are you?" He turned. It was the same girl with the red rain boots from earlier, minus the bear this time. She was seated on a stool by the front window, kicking her feet and sipping the hot chocolate he'd made her that morning. "I'm not," he asked, amused. She shook her head with the confidence of someone who'd already figured out the entire adult world by age 6. "You don't look like a barista. You look like someone pretending." "Is that bad?" She thought about it, brow furrowed. "Not really. My uncle pretends to be a dinosaur sometimes, but he's actually just an accountant." "Well then," Elon said, crouching beside her with a mock whisper, "let's keep my secret between us, okay?" She nodded solemnly. "I'm good at secrets." He smiled and stood up just in time to see Casey returning from a back, balancing a tray of fresh pastries that looked dangerously close to rebellion. "They're still too hot to serve," she warned, setting the tray down. "But give them 15 minutes, and they'll be edible happiness." Elon looked at the steaming tray, then at her. "You ever consider slowing down?" Casey wiped her hands on a towel. "If I slow down, I start thinking. Thinking leads to feeling, and I'm not in the mood for that." That answer stuck with him. Not in a judgmental way, more like a mirror he didn't expect to find in someone half his age. Before he could reply, the door opened again. This time, it was a woman in her late 50s, raincoat still dripping, with an air of composed urgency. She looked around like she was scanning for someone. "Casey Morgan?" she asked. Casey's whole posture shifted, her smile fading. "That's me. I'm Carol from Social Services. I was hoping we could talk for a moment. In private." A beat of silence filled the cafe. Casey blinked. "Now's not really a great time." "It won't take long." Elon watched as the girl who had taken control of a chaotic morning, who had stared down rude delivery men and espresso disasters alike, suddenly looked like a child again, unsure, defensive, bracing herself for impact. She nodded stiffly and led the woman to the corner table farthest from the counter. They sat. Elon didn't stare, but he kept her in his periphery, watching the way her hands fidgeted with the string of her apron, the way her eyes darted toward the door as if mapping escape routes. He didn't know the details, but he didn't need to. Pain had a language of its own, and he was fluent enough to recognize it. The conversation didn't last long. 10 minutes, maybe less. When Casey returned to the counter, her face was a study in composure, but her eyes were glossier than before. She didn't say anything, just picked up a rag and started wiping the already clean espresso machine. "Want me to take over for a bit?" Elon asked softly. She paused, swallowed, and gave a small nod. As he stepped behind the counter, she disappeared into the back again, this time not in urgency, but in need. Elon didn't follow. Instead, he faced the front, took a deep breath, and did the one thing he knew how to do in that moment: keep things running. He served 2 coffees, helped a teenager with a complicated frappe order, and joked with a pair of exhausted tourists who couldn't find their hotel. And somewhere in the back, he hoped Casey was breathing again. Sometimes, being helpful wasn't about solving the problem. Sometimes it was about holding space while someone found their footing again. The rain had tapered into a fine mist by the time Casey re-emerged from a back room. Her face was dry, her hands steady, but her eyes carried a faint redness she didn't bother hiding. Elon didn't say anything, didn't ask questions, didn't offer platitudes. He simply nodded at her, a silent invitation to reclaim her post, and she nodded back with the smallest flicker of gratitude. The cafe had calmed during her absence. The after-lunch lull stretched thin into the mid-afternoon, a quiet, suspended hour where regulars lingered with books and laptops and the occasional thoughtful stare out the window. Life didn't rush in here. It simmered. Casey leaned over the counter, wiping the same spot she always did when her mind needed motion. Elon stood beside her, not pretending to do anything anymore, just present. She finally spoke, her voice low and level. She said, "I might have to reapply for guardianship of my little brother." That caught Elon off guard. He turned toward her, but she kept her eyes fixed on the cloth in her hands. "His dad, my stepdad, is trying to get custody. He left years ago, but now he's claiming he's changed, that he's stable. And because I'm not his legal parent, I have to prove I'm better for Dylan." There was a long silence. Not an awkward one, just full. Heavy with the weight of everything she didn't say. "I'm sorry," Elon said, and he meant it more than she could know. "I've raised him since he was 9, she continued. "He's 14 now. I get him up for school, I cook, I work these shifts so I can pay the bills. I go to court hearings on my lunch breaks and come back here pretending I'm fine because people need their coffee with a smile." She paused. "And some guy in a button-up thinks he deserves him because he got clean for 12 months and learned how to show up." Her hands trembled slightly as she folded the cloth. Elon wanted to say something wise, something comforting, but all he could manage was, "That's not fair." She gave a humorless chuckle. "Yeah, well, fair's not really a thing, Eli. Not in my world." He didn't argue. He just leaned his elbows on the counter beside her and looked out the window. "I grew up with 5 older cousins in a 2-bedroom house," he said quietly. "When I got older, I thought if I made enough money, if I built big enough things, I could fix that feeling, like everything was always on the edge of falling apart." Casey glanced at him, slightly startled by the honesty. "But I think there's more courage in what you're doing," he added, turning to face her fully. "Not running away, not reinventing yourself, just showing up every day for someone else. That's what stability really looks like." She looked at him then, not as her accidental employee, not as someone who owed her an explanation, but as someone who understood, even just a little. And for the first time all day, she let herself exhale. Before she could respond, the front door opened, and a new face stepped in. A man in his late 30s, wearing a name tag and khakis, clearly not a regular. He looked around, confused by the seating chart that didn't exist and the vibe that didn't match the spreadsheet he likely lived by. "Hi, I have a job interview here. For a barista position?" Casey blinked. "Job interview?" The man looked at his phone. "Yeah, it was scheduled through some staffing agency. They said this place needed a part-timer." Casey blinked again. Then slowly, she turned to Elon. Her expression morphed from disbelief into a kind of playful glare. "You mean you're not actually my new hire?" Elon opened his mouth, closed it, shrugged. The staffing agency rep stood awkwardly in the doorway. "So do I still interview?" Casey shook her head, amused despite herself. "Come back tomorrow, and tell them next time to send someone who at least knows how to steam milk." The man nodded, awkwardly retreating. As the door swung closed again, Casey turned to Elon with a look. "Eli," she said slowly, "who are you?" He considered telling her his real name, about Tesla and SpaceX and the boardrooms and the satellites and the sleepless nights over spreadsheets and breakthroughs. He considered laying the whole thing bare. But instead, he just said, "Someone who really needed a good cup of coffee." She raised an eyebrow. "And a part-time job." "Maybe just part-time perspective," he replied. She laughed, really laughed this time, and shook her head as she picked up the steaming pitcher again. "You're a strange one, Eli. You're not the first to say that." As the sun began to peek through the thinning clouds, golden light spilled across the wood floors of the cafe, warming the quiet tension that had filled the space earlier. It felt like the kind of day that would linger in memory, not for its drama, but for its unexpected softness. Like a turning point dressed up as a coffee break. And neither of them, in that moment, wanted to be anywhere else. The rest of the day passed with an unspoken ease between them. There was no need to dissect what had happened, no need to label or explain. That moment of honesty had cracked something open, and in its place, a quiet understanding had taken root. The rhythm of the cafe returned, but now it moved to a softer beat. Casey and Elon worked in tandem, improvising like jazz musicians who had only just discovered they were in sync. They shared small smiles and even smaller jokes, the kind that only make sense when you're elbow deep in steamed milk and sticker paper. Casey started trusting him with the grinder, and Elon, still Eli, in this little world, stopped double-checking the machine settings like every button was a detonator. When the early dinner crowd faded and the sky outside shifted from gray to honey-tinted gold, Casey untied her apron and stretched her arms above her head with a groan that sounded like it came from her soul. "I swear this place ages me in dog years," she muttered, rubbing her neck. "Is that why the regulars call you Grandma Casey?" Elon asked innocently, placing the last washed mug on the drying rack. Casey narrowed her eyes and smirked. "Watch it, Eli. I've got a mean right hook." "Noted. I'll stand on your left." Their laughter spilled into the empty cafe like sunlight through a cracked window. It was light and silly and wholly earned. Casey moved toward the front, flipping the open sign to closed with a satisfying snap, then turned to Elon, who stood awkwardly by the counter, like a kid lingering after class. "You did good today," she said. "You sure? I think I scared that one guy when I gave him herbal tea instead of a cold brew." She shrugged. He needed to relax anyway. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Casey tilted her head. "So what's your deal? You just wander into cafes pretending to be employees?" Elon hesitated, his hands stuffed into his hoodie pockets. "No," he said slowly. "Today just happened. I woke up feeling off. Drove without knowing where I was going. Saw the rain. Saw this place. And then you thought I worked here. So I said yes." Casey studied him for a moment. "That's either the weirdest or most poetic thing I've ever heard. I get that a lot." She leaned back against the counter. "You talk like someone who's seen too much of the world and not enough of people." That caught him off guard, not in a bad way, but like she'd looked straight through him and found something he didn't even know he'd been carrying. "That's probably accurate," he admitted. She nodded, satisfied. "Thought so." The lights flickered for a moment, old wiring probably, and Casey walked to the back to grab her bag. Elon stood alone, looking around the cafe now bathed in amber light, with chairs upturned on tables and silence settling in like a quilt. She returned with a worn-out backpack slung over one shoulder. "You need a ride?" he asked. She paused at the door. "I walk. Don't live far." Elon opened his mouth, then closed it. He almost offered to walk her home, almost asked where she lived. But something told him that today had been exactly what it needed to be, and trying to extend it might break the spell. Instead, he simply said, "Thanks for letting me mess up your orders all day." Casey smiled, a real, soft smile that seemed to reach all the way into her tired eyes. "Thanks for showing up." And with that, she stepped out into the twilight, the door chiming softly behind her. Elon stood there for a long moment, the quiet pressing in. He exhaled slowly, then stepped out himself, locking the door behind him. The street was still damp, the pavement reflecting the last rays of the setting sun. A breeze tugged at his hoodie, and for the first time in weeks, maybe months, he felt lighter. Not fixed, not transformed, but lighter. He didn't know if he'd ever see Casey again, didn't know what tomorrow held. But he knew this, for one rainy day, in a coffee shop that smelled like cinnamon and survival, something good had happened. Something quietly beautiful. The following morning arrived quietly, the city still slick from last night's drizzle. There was no thunderous sunrise or symbolic ray of hope, just the slow unfolding of another day. But sometimes that's all it takes. Casey unlocked the cafe a little earlier than usual, her keys jangling in the lock, like a familiar song. The air inside still held the faint scent of espresso and cinnamon from the day before. She let herself stand there for a moment, just breathing it in. There was something sacred in the stillness before the first customer arrived, like the cafe was holding its breath, waiting to be filled with stories again. She moved through the motions, grinding beans, arranging the pastry display, wiping down counters already clean. But there was a flicker in her chest she hadn't felt in a while. A strange sense of anticipation. She told herself it had nothing to do with Eli. But she also didn't stop herself from glancing at the door every few minutes. At 7:42 a.m., the bell above the entrance chimed. A few regulars came in, Mr. Bernard, who always ordered a plain black coffee and left a crossword puzzle behind. May, the college student with headphones, seemingly fused to her skull. Then came a pause, a gap in the flow of faces. And then he walked in. Same hoodie, same cap. Elon Eli stood just inside the doorway, as if unsure if he was still welcome in this story he'd wander into. Casey arched an eyebrow. You lost again. He smiled, tugging his cap a little lower. Maybe I just missed the vibe. She nodded toward the back counter. Aprons in the same spot. He walked toward it like it was the most natural thing in the world. And somehow it was. They didn't talk about yesterday. They didn't need to. There was a shared understanding that whatever it had been, however strange or out of place, it had meant something. So they worked, poured coffees, took orders, shared glances that said more than words would have dared. Around mid-morning, the pace slowed, and Casey took a moment to grab a bite from a banana muffin she'd half forgotten was on the shelf. You know, she said between bites, you've got the rhythm down now. If I didn't know better, I'd say you were actually trained for this. Elon smirked. Let's just say I've survived a few startups. She raised an eyebrow, intrigued, but didn't push. Instead, she grabbed a towel and started wiping down the counter beside him. You're not like most people who wander into jobs they weren't hired for. Oh yeah. Most people would have run when I barked at them on day one. He laughed. You weren't that bad. You looked like you were reconsidering your whole life. I probably was. Their eyes met, and for a second, something unspoken floated between them, something real. Then the door chimed again. A boy walked in, 14, maybe 15, wearing a backpack too big for his frame, and a hoodie that matched Casey's in color and fray. His expression shifted when he saw her, and hers softened instantly. Hey Dylan, she said, stepping out from behind the counter. Elon watched as she walked toward the boy, ruffling his hair gently. Thought you had early dismissal today, she asked. Mr. Long broke the projector, Dylan mumbled. They just sent us home. She glanced toward the clock. You want to hang in the back for a while? I've got muffins. Real ones, not the stale kind. Dylan nodded, then caught sight of Elon. Who's that? He asked. Casey glanced back. That's Eli. He's helping out. Elon raised a hand in greeting. Hey. Dylan nodded once, suspicious but curious, then followed Casey into the back. Elon heard her say something about not touching the espresso machine no matter how bored he got, and Dylan's laugh echoed softly through the cafe like a memory that hadn't fully faded. When she returned, her smile lingered. That's your brother? Elon asked. She nodded, wiping her hands on a towel. Yeah, that's Dylan. He seems sharp. He is. Too sharp sometimes. But he's good. He's what keeps me going. Elon looked toward the back of the cafe, then back at her. You're doing a hell of a job. She didn't answer, just nodded and went back to steaming milk. But her silence wasn't distance. It was something else. A quiet acknowledgement. A thank you she didn't know how to say out loud. The rest of the day passed with a quiet rhythm, the kind that only comes when people trust each other enough not to fill every silence. Dylan stayed in the back, headphones on, occasionally appearing to sneak a muffin or refill his water bottle. Casey checked on him now and then, but never hovered. She knew him too well. Knew when he needed space, and when he needed to feel like someone noticed, he was still in the room. Elon, watching all of this from his post at the register, noticed something else, something deeper. Dylan didn't just move like a kid trying to stay out of the way. He moved like someone who had learned, too young, that he had to monitor the emotional temperature of a room before fully stepping into it. He was cautious, thoughtful, but not shy. At one point, while Casey was busy organizing the inventory, Dylan slipped back to the counter and stood beside Elon, studying him without saying a word. "You really work here?" the boy finally asked, arms crossed over his hoodie. Elon hesitated. "Kind of. It's complicated." "Are you like a friend of hers?" The question was simple, but it carried weight. Weight Elon wasn't sure how to hold just yet. "I guess I'm someone who showed up when she needed help," he said. Dylan nodded slowly, as if measuring the answer for authenticity. "She doesn't usually let people help." Elon turned to him, curious. "Why is that?" "Because most people help once and then leave. Or they help because they want something." There it was, the guarded wisdom of a kid who'd seen too many promises go hollow. Elon felt the truth of it settle in his chest like a stone. "Well," he said gently, "I don't want anything. Except maybe to not mess up her latte orders." That earned a faint smirk from Dylan before he retreated back into the shadows of the cafe. Later that afternoon, after the last burst of customers died down and the slow hum of the espresso machine faded into silence, Casey and Elon sat on milk crates near the back exit, sharing what was left of a cranberry scone and a rare moment of stillness. "Dylan talked to me earlier," Elon said casually. Casey raised an eyebrow. "Yeah. He grilled me." "Good," she said, a flicker of pride in her voice. "He doesn't trust easy. He told me you don't let people help." She didn't respond right away, just pulled her knees closer and stared at the floor. "I don't," she admitted. "I've seen what happens when you depend on people who say they'll stick around. The silence after they don't, it's worse than the chaos." Elon nodded slowly. "That's fair." A beat passed. "But," she added, her voice quieter now, "sometimes you have to make room, even if it's just a sliver." They sat there in companionable quiet, the kind that feels like the world has stopped spinning for a moment just to let two people breathe. Then, Elon said something he hadn't planned to. "Would it be weird if I came back tomorrow?" Casey turned her head to look at him. "Weirder than you pretending to work here in the first place." He grinned. "Good point." She smiled, then looked down at her hands. "No, it wouldn't be weird." That was all he needed. Casey hadn't meant for it to become routine, but somehow it did. Eli, still just Eli to her, even though she knew there was more to the story, kept showing up. Not with grand gestures or extravagant plans. He simply arrived early, put on the same hoodie, tied the apron she finally insisted he wear so people don't think you're robbing us, and started brewing. There was something grounding about him. He didn't ask too many questions. He didn't try to fix anything. He was just present. And for someone who'd spent years watching people drift in and out of her life like shadows on a wall, that meant something. Dylan began showing up more, too. Not because he had to, but because he seemed to want to. He'd sit in the corner booth after school, sketching in a beat-up notebook or nursing a lukewarm chai Casey made just the way he liked it, barely sweet, no foam. He didn't say much to Elon at first, but he watched him, carefully, like someone studying a puzzle before deciding whether it was worth solving. Then one Tuesday afternoon it shifted. Casey was elbow-deep in dishes, and Elon was restocking the syrup shelf when Dylan wandered over to the counter and casually asked, "You ever build anything?" Elon looked up. "You mean like furniture? Like machines? Tech stuff that works?" The way he asked wasn't casual, though. There was weight behind it. Interest. A spark Elon recognized immediately because he'd once had the same glint in his own eyes at that age. "Yeah," Elon said, choosing his words carefully. "I've built a few things." Dylan nodded. "I'm trying to make a drone that can navigate corners without slamming into everything. But the sensors are junk. School kits are always junk." Elon smiled. "You designing the flight algorithm yourself?" Dylan's eyes widened. "You know what that is?" "I might," Elon replied, wiping his hands on a towel. "Want to show me your sketchbook?" The next hour was one of the quietest and most remarkable moments in that cafe's history. Dylan opened up, flipping through rough designs and scribbled equations that, while messy, held genuine promise. Elon asked questions, made small suggestions, and mostly just listened. Casey noticed the shift immediately. Not just in Dylan's posture, which straightened with every word of encouragement, but in his eyes. She watched from the sink, frozen in a moment she didn't want to interrupt. Her brother, so often cautious, withdrawn, burdened by everything he wouldn't say, was opening up to someone who wasn't her. And for once, she wasn't afraid of that. Later, after the cafe had emptied and the quiet had settled in, she and Elon sat by the front window, sharing a cinnamon roll and watching the world turn gold beneath the setting sun. "He's different around you," she said. Elon looked toward the corner booth where Dylan had been. "He's smart. Real smart." "I know, but he doesn't usually let people in. Not since." She didn't finish. She didn't have to. Elon nodded. Kids who learn to protect themselves early sometimes forget what it feels like to be curious. But it's still there. You just have to give it space. Casey looked at him, the flicker of a question behind her eyes. "Why do you know that?" He hesitated. "Then, because I was him." A beat, the hum of the fridge, the tick of the wall clock. "I don't know who you really are," Casey said softly. "And I'm not asking. But whoever you were before this, before us, thank you for showing up like this. For showing up for him." Elon didn't speak right away. He just smiled, that quiet kind of smile that comes from being understood in a way that doesn't demand explanation. Outside, the wind stirred fallen leaves across the pavement, and for a moment, it felt like everything in the world had paused to witness the grace of something unspoken blooming into trust. The next few days passed like pages being quietly turned, each one deeper than the last, revealing more color, more texture, more truth. The rhythm of the cafe stayed steady, but the bonds forming within it grew stronger, like steam curling gently above a fresh cup. Casey began to notice the small things. How Dylan seemed more energized in the mornings, how he spent less time with his hood pulled up and more time engaged, sketching, researching, talking, even laughing. And how Elon never overstepped, never tried to parent or push. He offered knowledge the way someone offers a hand across a creek, steady but never forceful. What she didn't expect was how much it would affect her. It was a Thursday afternoon when she finally asked the question that had been sitting in the back of her mind for days. The cafe was quiet, and Dylan had left early for study group. Elon was sitting near the window, staring out at nothing in particular, sipping a lukewarm espresso. Casey stood behind the counter, a towel hanging from her apron pocket, her fingers unconsciously fidgeting with a coffee stirrer. She walked over and leaned against the table where he sat. "Eli," she said softly, "can I ask you something?" He turned, meeting her eyes with an openness that surprised her. "Of course. You're not this. I mean, you're good at it, but this isn't your life. Is it?" He didn't answer immediately. He set his cup down gently. "No," he said, "not usually." "Then what is?" she asked, and when he hesitated, she added quickly, "You don't have to tell me everything. I'm just curious." He looked down for a moment, then slowly removed his cap, setting it on the table, like it weighed more than it should. "I used to run things," he said. "Big things. companies, teams, projects that stretched past the sky. I spent years chasing goals that looked good on paper, that broke boundaries. And somewhere along the way, I forgot what it felt like to be part of something small that mattered just as much. She listened in silence. I came here by accident, he continued. I wasn't supposed to be in this neighborhood. I wasn't even supposed to be in the city. But something pulled me off course. And when you looked at me and told me to grab an apron, I don't know. I didn't want to say no. Casey nodded slowly, the weight of his words settling around them like a shared blanket. So why keep coming back? She asked. He looked out the window again. The sun had begun to set, casting a golden haze across the cafe floor. Because here, things feel real. And I forgot how much I needed that. She studied him, the way the light softened the lines on his face, the way his words weren't rehearsed but rooted. Your name's not Eli, is it? She asked. He smirked. No. She waited. Elon, he said finally. My name is Elon. There was no gasp, no wide-eyed realization, just a pause. Then Casey chuckled under her breath. Of course it is. He looked up, surprised. I knew you were hiding something, she said. Didn't think it was that. But it tracks. You're not going to freak out. No, she said, but you do owe me a week of unpaid labor. Billionaire or not. They both laughed, not out of awkwardness, but relief. The truth was out now, and somehow, it didn't change anything. If anything, it made the quiet between them feel even more honest. Casey stood up, brushing her hands on her apron. Come on, I'm closing early today. You can help me lock up. And then maybe, just maybe, I'll let you buy me a coffee somewhere you don't have to make it. Elon smiled, rising to his feet. Deal. The next morning came with a cold wind and the first signs of early fall brushing across the sidewalk in swirling leaves. Inside Clover Bean, the air was warm, sweet with the scent of cinnamon and toasted walnut, and carrying a feeling of quiet expectancy, like something was about to shift, but no one yet knew in which direction. Casey opened up alone that day. Elon had texted just after sunrise. Running late. Everything okay there? She'd replied simply, so far. See you when you get here. And she meant it. She had grown used to his presence, but not in the way people grow dependent. More like the way you grow familiar with a song that plays in the background of your morning routine. Comforting, steady, not essential but undeniably missed when absent. By mid-morning, the cafe was busy. Dylan had dropped by earlier, said he had a meeting with his school counselor, and disappeared again in his signature quiet style. Casey had smiled at him, handed him a banana muffin, and told him to be honest with the counselor, something he only half promised. She was pouring milk for a cappuccino when the bell above the door chimed, and a woman in a tailored navy coat stepped inside, pausing with purpose just beyond the threshold. Her heels clicked sharply on the floor as she walked, scanning the cafe like she'd never stepped into a place that didn't offer table service or reservation list. Casey felt it in her gut. This woman wasn't here for coffee. Can I help you? She asked, setting the milk down slowly. The woman smiled, crisp and practiced. I'm looking for Elon Musk. Casey blinked. Her first reaction was to lie. Reflex almost. But instead, she said carefully, he's not here right now. The woman nodded, unfazed. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder, placing it neatly on the counter. When he arrives, please give him this. And let him know that the board would appreciate a response within 24 hours. Casey narrowed her eyes slightly. Board of Tesla, SpaceX, X Technologies. Take your pick. A few nearby customers glanced over at the sound of those names, but Casey kept her voice low. And you are. The woman gave her name, which Casey forgot the moment it was said. It wasn't meant to be remembered. It was the kind of name people dropped like business cards, more label than identity. I'm one of the people who's been trying to get in touch with him, she added with a faint smile. It's been over a week. The board isn't fond of silence. And with that, she turned on her heel and left. Casey stared at the folder on the counter for a long moment. It was simple, unassuming, but it might as well have been glowing. When Elon finally arrived 20 minutes later, hoodie on, breath visible in the cool air, she didn't say anything right away. She let him settle in, let him wash his hands and greet a couple of regulars before he slipped behind the counter like he belonged there. Then she slid the folder toward him. "You had a visitor." He looked at it, then at her. His expression shifted, but not to surprise. More like resignation. "They found me," he said simply. Casey folded her arms. "You knew they would. Eventually. Are you going back?" He looked away. "I don't know." Casey nodded, jaw tight. "Well, they seemed pretty clear they want an answer." He opened the folder and glanced at the papers inside, standard corporate language, signatures, expectations, consequences. The future he'd put on pause now staring back at him in black ink and obligation. "I don't know what I want," he admitted quietly. She watched him for a moment. Not angry, not sad, just bracing. "You can't stay hidden here forever, Elon. This isn't Neverland." "I'm not hiding." "Aren't you?" That landed harder than she expected it to. He didn't respond. She turned back to the espresso machine, suddenly overwhelmed by the urge to move, to do something with her hands, to shake off the strange chill crawling up her spine. He spoke again, his voice low. "I'm not ready to go back to being that person." Casey looked over her shoulder. "And what if you don't have to be?" He frowned. "What do you mean?" "What if this, what we're doing here, it's not about choosing between the world you had and this one? What if you could carry parts of both?" He didn't answer, but she could see in his eyes that something was shifting. Not quite clarity, but maybe the start of it. And then, from behind them, Dylan's voice. "What's going on?" They both turned. He'd slipped in unnoticed, his backpack slung over one shoulder, his hoodie slightly damp from the drizzle. Casey and Elon exchanged a look. No words passed, just something understood. Elon folded the folder shut and slid it beneath the counter. "Nothing important," he said with a faint smile. "Just someone trying to sell me insurance." Dylan raised an eyebrow, unconvinced but uninterested enough to let it go. He walked toward the booth in the corner and pulled out his notebook. Casey gave Elon one last look, soft but steady. "We're here," she said, "but we won't wait forever." Elon didn't return the next day, nor the day after. For the first time in over a week, the apron stayed untouched on its hook in the back, and the counter next to Casey felt strangely empty, even though others filled it briefly. A retired bus driver named Jan helped her mop the floor one morning. May offered to organize the bakery display. Regulars pitched in without knowing why, as though they could sense something had shifted beneath the surface. Casey said little. She worked like always, wiped things that didn't need wiping, made drinks on autopilot, and forced her smile into place like a mask that had grown stiff at the edges. Dylan asked once, just once, "Is he coming back?" She didn't know the answer, and instead of pretending, she simply shook her head. "I hope so." He didn't ask again, but he started staying later, sitting in Eli's usual spot by the window, sketching with headphones on, occasionally glancing at the door like someone waiting for the weather to change. By the end of the third day, Casey found herself lingering by the window after closing, watching the empty street and holding the apron Elon had never taken with him. She wasn't angry, just confused, and maybe a little hurt in the quiet way that only comes when someone leaves just after you start believing they might actually stay. Then, on the fourth morning, the door opened at 6:53 a.m., before even the first light had stretched across the hardwood floor. And there he was. No hoodie this time. No cap. Just Elon, hair still messy from sleep, coat zipped halfway, a paper bag in one hand, and a look in his eyes that said he wasn't sure if he had a right to be there. Casey stared at him from behind the counter, frozen in the middle of pulling down cups. He stepped forward slowly. "Hey." She blinked. "You're alive." He gave a dry smile. "Sorry, I needed space. Time. I wasn't sure if I should come back." Casey tilted her head. "You couldn't text." "I didn't know what to say that wouldn't sound like a retreat." She nodded once, then twice. "Fair." Elon placed the paper bag on the counter. Apology muffins. From that weird little bakery down on 8th. The woman running it threatened to curse me if I didn't try the apple cinnamon. Casey cracked a smile despite herself. I'm not mad, she said, softer now. I know, he interrupted gently. I didn't run because of the folder. Or because of you. I ran because being here made me realize how much I've forgotten what it means to really connect with people. And I didn't know if I deserved it. She looked at him for a long time, the space between them filled with everything unsaid. Then she reached for the paper bag, pulled it open, and took out a muffin. I don't think you're supposed to earn connection, she said. You just have to show up for it. And you did. Then you didn't. And now you're here again. I'm here, he repeated, nodding. If you'll still have me. Casey bit into the muffin and chewed thoughtfully. Depends, she said after a moment. On whether you're ready to wear the stupid apron again. He laughed, really laughed this time, and for the first time that morning, the cafe felt like it had taken a full breath. At 7:18, Dylan walked into the sound of laughter and warm air. He froze in the doorway when he saw Elon behind the counter, tying the apron clumsily around his waist. Elon looked up. Hey, kid. Dylan hesitated, then closed the door behind him and walked over slowly. You're late, he said, sliding into his usual booth. Traffic was murder, Elon replied, and I had to bribe a baker for these muffins. Dylan raised an eyebrow. She curse you? Almost. Dylan smirked and pulled out his sketchbook, flipping it open without another word. But the line of tension across his shoulders had eased. He settled into his spot like someone who had reclaimed something he didn't realize he'd lost. As the morning picked up and regulars began trickling in, Casey moved through the space with lighter steps. Elon took orders, fumbled with the register again, and received sarcastic applause when he remembered the difference between oat and almond milk. By 10 a.m., the cafe felt like it had remembered how to breathe. And as the sun filled the windows and the smell of cinnamon drifted through the room, 3 people who had once been strangers now moved together like they belonged, not out of obligation, but out of something quieter and deeper. Something earned in silence and repaired with presence. For a few fleeting days, things at Clover Bean felt like they had settled into something close to harmony. The coffee flowed. The air was filled with the usual background chatter of old friends, open laptops, and fresh muffins. Dylan laughed more. Casey smiled more, and Elon Eli, as some regulars still called him, stopped watching the door like someone waiting for the world to catch up to him. But the world, as always, had a way of showing up when you least wanted it. It happened on a bright Thursday, the kind of afternoon that hinted at spring even though winter still clung to the edges of the sky. Elon had just finished helping a flustered customer understand the difference between a latte and a flat white when the door opened, and a familiar pair of high-end loafers crossed the threshold. It wasn't the same woman from before. This time it was a man, tall, tailored, and too confident. He wore a sharp navy suit, glasses that probably cost more than most people's rent, and a Bluetooth earpiece that he clearly didn't intend to remove. He scanned the cafe, eyes locking onto Elon with the precision of someone used to taking command of a room. Elon, he said, loud enough that even the espresso machine paused. The cafe went quiet. A few customers looked up from their laptops. Dylan sat frozen in the corner booth. Casey, who had just stepped out of the back, stopped cold mid-step. Elon didn't respond at first. He finished wiping the counter. Then slowly he turned. Hello, Marcus. The man gave a tight smile. We need to talk. Casey came forward, her expression unreadable. Can we help you with something? Marcus looked at her, then at the cafe, as if trying to understand why Elon Musk was in a place where the Wi-Fi password was handwritten on a chalkboard. I'm here on behalf of the board, he said. We've been patient, but decisions need to be made. And frankly, no one's impressed with your extended vacation. This isn't a vacation, Elon said calmly. This is real. Marcus chuckled without humor. Real? Elon, you're wearing an apron. You're working a register. You think that's real? You've built things that change the world. You don't belong in a place like this. Casey's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Elon looked down at the apron, then at the customers, the shelves of mismatched mugs, the sunlight dancing off the wooden countertop. "This place may be small," he said, "but it's more real than anything I've built in years." Marcus stepped forward, lowering his voice just enough to keep the tension sharp. "The world doesn't pause for nostalgia. You've got projects unraveling, investors whispering, and right now, you're the headline everyone's watching. I'm aware. Then act like it." The silence that followed was heavier than any slammed door. Dylan stood now, quietly approaching from the corner. "Is this guy serious?" he asked, no longer a kid in the room, but someone defending his space. Marcus gave him a once-over and raised an eyebrow. "And who are you?" "I'm the reason he remembers how to listen." That landed harder than anyone expected. Casey stepped between them then, not aggressive, just steady. "You made your point. Now go." Marcus stared at her, then at Elon, whose posture hadn't flinched. "This isn't over," he said, then turned and walked out. The door closed behind him like a slap. The cafe was still. Elon removed the apron, folded it carefully, set it on the counter. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. But Casey stepped closer. "Don't be." He looked up. "You don't have to run," she said. "You just have to choose." Dylan nodded beside her, eyes still fixed on the door. "They're going to keep coming, aren't they?" "Probably," Elon said. "Then maybe it's time you stop being scared of what they think." Elon blinked, not because he was surprised, but because he wasn't. For the first time, someone had said the thing he'd been circling around since he stepped into the cafe. That the real decision wasn't whether to stay or leave. It was whether he was ready to be the kind of person who showed up on purpose. He looked at both of them, then at the cafe, still waiting, still his, in its quiet, chaotic way. "I'll be back tomorrow," he said. Casey nodded. "We'll be here." The next day, Elon returned not just as a man with something to prove, but as someone ready to belong. There was no dramatic entrance, no speech. He simply showed up before the sun had fully risen, carrying a box of supplies no one had asked for, extra filters, reusable mugs, a small toolkit for the wobbly espresso machine Casey kept meaning to fix but never had time for. "Thought I'd make myself useful," he said, setting the box down gently on the counter. Casey, already halfway through prepping the pastry display, turned with a look that said more than any words could. "You already are," she replied. The warmth between them was no longer tentative. It had shifted into something grounded. Not romantic, at least not yet, but intimate in the kind of way that only comes when people show up for each other without needing to be asked. Dylan arrived after school, hoodie slung half off his shoulder, eyes alert. The moment he saw Elon fiddling with the espresso machine's gasket with a focused expression, he dropped his backpack beside the booth and wandered over. "You're fixing the steam valve." "Trying to. It's corroded." "I said that last week." "You were right." A small smile tugged at the corner of Dylan's mouth. "Need help? I was hoping you'd ask." For the next hour, the cafe ran on half caffeine and full connection. While Casey handled the front, Elon and Dylan worked quietly in the back corner, surrounded by screws, a flashlight, and a surprising amount of teamwork. There were no lectures, no ego. Just questions and responses, trial and error, and a shared satisfaction each time they figured something out. And in the process, something else was being rebuilt, not just a machine, but trust. Around 5 p.m., the cafe quieted down. Dylan packed up his notebook, while Elon stood wiping grease off his hands with a napkin. Casey leaned on the counter, sipping the first real coffee she'd had all day. "You two made a solid team," she said. Elon glanced at Dylan. "He's got an engineer's brain." "Dylan doesn't let most people in," she said softly. "He's not being polite. He's choosing you." Dylan didn't deny it. He just adjusted his hoodie and looked up at Elon. "You ever build stuff just for fun?" Elon tilted his head. "It used to be the only reason I built anything." The boy nodded, then pulled something from his bag. It was a small sketch, one of his drone blueprints, more detailed now, more precise. "If I print this, can you help me make it work?" Elon took the paper and studied it like a sacred document. Yeah, I think we can. As the light began to fade into dusk, the trio sat together by the window. The cafe wasn't busy, but it didn't need to be. It was enough just to be. Casey looked out at the street, then at the two of them. You know, this whole thing started because I thought you were someone you weren't. Elon looked at her. Maybe you didn't. She met his gaze. Maybe I saw the version of you that was buried under everything else. He didn't respond, just nodded, because she was right. The invitation arrived late on a Friday evening, an embossed envelope tucked beneath the cafe door like something out of a movie. Casey found it when she was sweeping near closing time, her brow furrowing as she picked it up and turned it over. No return address, just a clean, weighty envelope with Elon's name typed in bold, centered serif. She handed it to him without a word. He took it slowly, like it might detonate in his hand. Inside was a formal invitation to a private industry summit in Palo Alto, an elite gathering of innovators, investors, and tech giants. The kind of event where people used first names like currency and futures were bought and sold between sips of $8 espresso. It was scheduled for the following week. The keynote, left blank for him. Casey said nothing as he read it, but the silence in the cafe thickened. Dylan had already gone home. The lights above them hummed gently. "You gonna go?" she asked finally. Elon didn't answer right away. He sat on the stool near the window, invitation still in his hands. "It's tempting," he admitted. "I haven't been in that room for a while." "And if you're not in that room, someone else is," Casey said softly. "Someone with less empathy, maybe. Less heart." He looked at her, surprised. "You think I should go?" "I think," she said carefully, "that this cafe is not the only place you matter. I think people listen to you. And maybe that means something more when the person they're listening to actually understands what it's like to be small again." He stared at the invitation for a long time, then folded it and slid it into his jacket. "I'm not sure I can be both," he said. "That version of me and the version that belongs here." She tilted her head. "What if you don't have to choose?" That stuck with him. The next day, he arrived at the cafe in a blazer instead of a hoodie. No apron, no register duty. He simply walked in, ordered coffee, and sat at the booth where Dylan usually did his sketching. When Casey approached, he looked up, clearly nervous. "I think I'm going," he said. "Just for a few days." She nodded. "I figured. I don't want to disappear again. Not like last time." "Then don't." He hesitated. "You sure you'll be okay here?" She gave a tired but genuine smile. "I've kept this place running through worse than you leaving for a weekend conference." He chuckled. "Fair enough." At that moment, Dylan walked in, pausing as he saw Elon in the blazer. "You look weird," he said. "Thank you," Elon replied with mock formality. Dylan slid into the booth across from him, pulling out a fresh sketch. "Before you go off and get mobbed by nerds in suits, can I show you something?" Elon leaned in. "Always." The design was rough but smart, an evolution of the drone project, now incorporating modular parts and improved control surfaces. Elon studied it with the same attention he once gave launch trajectories. "You're getting close," he said. "This could actually work." Dylan tried to hide the grin that crept across his face. Casey watched from behind the counter, arms crossed, heart somewhere in her throat. It wasn't the conference that bothered her. It was the possibility that the man who had grown roots in their world might remember what it was like to fly and never look back. But still, she said nothing. Because love, real love, whether platonic, familial, or the kind that still doesn't know what name to wear, isn't about holding someone down. It's about giving them reason to come back. As the sun began to set that evening, Elon stood by the door, his bag in hand. He turned to Casey and Dylan one last time. "I'll be back Monday," he said. "Hold down the fort." "We always do," Casey replied. Dylan gave a small salute, then turned back to his sketch. And with that, Elon stepped into the twilight, toward whatever waited for him on the other side of the spotlight. But this time, it wasn't an escape. It was a promise. The summit was held in a gleaming tower of glass and steel, where the air smelled faintly of citrus-scented wealth, and the hallways echoed with polished ambition. Everyone wore the same uniform, confidence paired with lanyards, and smiles that didn't always reach their eyes. Elon stepped into the space as if returning to a childhood home he no longer recognized. It was familiar, yes, but also strange. He hadn't forgotten how to navigate these waters, but he noticed now how cold they were, how loud, how lacking in soul. He shook hands. He nodded through keynotes. He sat in boardroom side chats where people talked about the future like it was a product, not a shared destination. By the time he was ushered toward the private suite where his unscheduled remarks were to be delivered, he felt a weight he hadn't carried in weeks. Not the weight of expectation, he knew how to handle that, but the weight of something deeper, distance. Distance from the coffee-splattered counter, the mismatched mugs, the quiet smiles exchanged over cinnamon rolls and chalkboard menus. As he stood before a semicircle of executives, engineers, influencers, and opportunists, a projection screen behind him lit up with his name in bold. The applause was polite, expected. Elon took a breath, looked out at the rows of chairs, and said, "I don't have a presentation." A few murmurs, one or two laughs. "I've spent the last few years solving problems that felt like puzzles, complex, thrilling, headline-worthy. But lately, I've been thinking more about people than puzzles. I've been thinking about connection, about presence, about showing up." The room shifted. Curiosity grew. "I've been working in a coffee shop." Now the murmur turned into audible disbelief. Elon didn't flinch. "I made lattes, swept floors, refilled sugar jars. I met a teenage engineer who understands balance better than some of the brightest minds I've mentored. I watched a young woman lead under pressure without ever needing to dominate. And I remembered what it means to be human in a space that demands nothing more than your time, your heart, and your ability to listen." Silence. Technology should serve people. But too often, we build it in rooms like this, removed from the heartbeat of the everyday. We talk scale and metrics and disruption, while forgetting that most people just want to feel seen, heard, understood. He paused. The air hung heavy now. "I'm not here to pitch a product. I'm not here to announce a new launch. I'm here to say, if the future doesn't have room for empathy, it's not worth building." He left the podium. No applause at first, just stunned silence. Then, slowly, a few people clapped. Then more. Then most. But Elon wasn't looking for their approval anymore. He exited the room before they finished. Outside, the sun was beginning to dip. He pulled out his phone and tapped out a message. "Still open tonight." The reply came almost instantly. "Always." It was after dark when Elon returned to the cafe. The glow of the hanging string lights bounced softly off the windows, and the warm interior stood in contrast to the sharp night air outside. He hesitated on the sidewalk for a moment, holding the door handle like it might transport him somewhere other than home. Then he pushed it open. The bell above the door gave its usual chime, but the moment felt anything but routine. Casey looked up from a counter. She was rearranging the pastry display, her apron dusted lightly with flour. When she saw him, she didn't smile immediately. She didn't run over or make a scene. She just nodded, like someone welcoming back a familiar rhythm. "You came back early," she said, wiping her hands on cloth. "They didn't need more time," Elon replied. "They needed truth." She nodded, motioning toward the stool by the counter. "Well, truth is still welcome here, along with bad jokes and decent espresso." He sat down slowly, eyes scanning the space. It was the same, and yet it felt different, like he was seeing it through new eyes. Through the lens of someone who had now stood in both worlds and finally chosen one with his full heart. Dylan emerged from the back, hoodie half-zipped, earbuds dangling around his neck. When he saw Elon, he blinked in surprise. "Didn't think we'd see you until Monday." "I was homesick," Elon said. Dylan didn't say anything at first. Then he tossed something across the counter, a folded piece of paper, slightly smudged with pencil. Elon unfolded it. A new sketch. Cleaner lines, tighter engineering. A vision of the drone they discussed, now with additions, solar panels, a dynamic stabilizer, even code snippets for flight control. "You kept working on it," Elon said, impressed. "I thought maybe you'd want to help me build the prototype," Dylan said, voice casual but eyes searching. Elon looked up at him. "I'd be honored." The three of them, Elon, Casey, and Dylan, stood in that little cafe long after the last customer had left, the espresso machine off, the music low. They talked about the conference, about the speech, about what comes next. Not in terms of press releases or product launches, but in real terms, human ones. "You know," Casey said as she leaned against the counter, "this place was never supposed to be permanent. It was just something I took over when everything else fell apart." "But maybe," Elon said, "it's not about how long something lasts. Maybe it's about who you become while you're in it." She looked at him, soft and serious. "You think people like us ever really settle?" "I think people like us redefine what settling even means." Dylan, now sitting on the edge of a table, added, "Or maybe we just build our own kind of future." Casey smiled, "With lattes and drones." Elon chuckled. "Stranger things have changed the world." The night stretched on, and no one reached for their phones. No one checked the time. There was a peacefulness in the quiet, in the presence, in the simplicity of just being. Before leaving, Elon walked over to the apron hanging behind the counter, the one that had started it all. He didn't put it on. He just straightened on the hook and gave it a respectful nod. "I'll be in early tomorrow," he said. Casey raised an eyebrow. "Uniform or blazer?" He smiled. "You'll see." And with that, he stepped back into the night, not to escape, but to rest, to return again and again to the place where purpose had finally met peace. By the time spring officially arrived, Clover Bean had become something more than just a neighborhood cafe. It was a kind of quiet hub, part sanctuary, part gathering place, the kind of spot where people came not just for coffee, but for connection. The regulars noticed that the playlist was always just right, that the banana bread was never burnt, and that somehow the espresso machine never broke down anymore. They didn't know the man behind the counter used to launch rockets. They just knew that when he was there, things worked. And if you were lucky, he might even teach you how to steam milk like a pro. But not everything in the world stayed contained in cozy corners. It started with a headline. A blog post went viral. Someone had recognized Elon in the cafe, snapped a picture of him in an apron beside a teenage boy holding a drone prototype, and a barista who looked like she hadn't slept in a year, but still smiled like it mattered. The caption read, "Elon Musk working at random coffee shop?" No, seriously. It was meant to be clickbait, but it became something else. Within 48 hours, journalists were outside. Influencers wandered in trying to order coffee while live streaming. A handful of venture capitalists came in wearing Patagonia vests and ordering the Elon special like it was a secret code. Casey didn't panic. She just adjusted. She turned down interview requests. She set limits. She drew a polite but unshakable line around her cafe. But Dylan noticed the difference immediately. Suddenly people wanted to talk to him, not because of who he was, but because of who he was next to. He grew quieter, folded inward, stopped sketching in public. And Elon, he blamed himself. One night after closing, the three of them sat together in the back, the cafe dark except for the lights from the espresso bar casting golden shadows across the room. "I thought I could stay invisible," Elon said, voice low. "You're Elon Musk," Dylan said flatly. "You're not built for invisible." "But I was," Elon replied. "For a while. Until someone snapped a photo I didn't see coming." Casey leaned forward, elbows on her knees. "We knew it wouldn't last forever. But this, what we built, it's still real. No headline can change that. But it's changing Dylan's space. It's changing your peace." Dylan stood suddenly, crossing the room to grab a folded paper off the corkboard, the drone sketch. He held it up, a crease running through the center from being handled too many times. "This was never about hiding," he said. "It was about building something without everyone watching." Elon looked up at him, quiet, waiting. Dylan sighed. "But I don't want to stop building just because people started watching." Casey nodded slowly. Then we make them watch the right thing. That's when the idea took shape, not a retreat, but a shift. Elon didn't need to disappear. He needed to redefine why he was visible. The next day, Elon posted a single statement online. For anyone wondering, yes, I work part-time at Clover Bean. And no, I'm not leaving. But if you stop by, bring kindness. And maybe tip the staff. No interviews. No clickbait. Just truth. What followed surprised them all. The crowd changed. The gawkers slowly left. The people who stayed were quieter. Kinda. Curious, yes, but present. They asked for coffee, not autographs. They sat and listened. They noticed Dylan's sketches, and they asked Casey about the playlist. The cafe became a story, but one told gently by people who didn't want to break the magic. And one afternoon, Elon walked in to find something new on the menu chalkboard. Under specials, it read, "The Eli. Half courage, half cinnamon, with a shot of starting over." He laughed so loud it startled the woman reading by the window. That evening, as the sky blushed into lavender and the last of the spring lights slipped behind the trees, Elon took off his blazer and pulled his apron back over his head. The cafe belonged to all of them now, not because of who they were, but because of what they'd chosen to become together. Months passed. The seasons shifted, folding spring into summer, and with it came warmth, not just in temperature, but in the way people looked at each other. Smiled longer, sat closer, spoke softer. Clover Bean had become more than just a cafe. It had become a second home to many. And to a few, it had become the beginning of everything. The drone Dylan, designed with Elon's help, took flight one quiet afternoon behind the shop. It soared higher than anyone expected, pivoted smoothly around corners, and returned with the elegance of a bird that knew exactly where it belonged. Dylan had filmed the whole thing, and when he showed Casey, she clutched the edge of the counter like it might lift off next. "I knew it would work," she whispered. Elon had just smiled, arms crossed, watching Dylan more than the drone. So did he. They started calling it the Clover One. Eventually, Elon divided his time. He returned to his public ventures, yes, but not the same way. He brought Dylan along to speak at a youth robotics symposium. He had Casey consult on the design of an employee wellness cafe inside a Tesla facility. And most days, he still showed up at Clover Bean for morning shift, tying on his apron with a smirk and saying things like, "What kind of future are we brewing today?" He wasn't a myth anymore. He was Eli, and everyone knew it. One evening, after closing, Casey stood at the threshold of the cafe's front door, a new chalkboard sign in her hand. The old one, weathered, cracked, smudged with stories, had earned its rest. She stepped outside, hung the new one on the hook, and stepped back to read what she had written. "Welcome to Clover Bean. Come for the coffee. Stay for the people. Leave a little better than you came." Inside, Elon wiped down the espresso bar. Dylan rearranged the cookie display again. Casey stepped back in, flipped the lock, and for a moment, they all stood in the center of the space they had built together. No headlines, no noise, just presence. Elon turned to her. "You know what I've learned?" Casey raised an eyebrow. "Only one thing." He laughed. "Okay, one important thing." She waited. That the smallest spaces, when filled with the right people, can hold the biggest parts of your life. She smiled. "You're finally getting it." Dylan grinned without looking up from the cookies. Took him long enough. They all laughed, and it echoed off the walls like memory. The world outside kept spinning. The headlines would change again, the buzz would come and go. But in that little corner cafe, under a string of lights and the smell of cinnamon, a quiet revolution had taken root. The kind that doesn't ask for attention, but leaves an imprint on every soul it touches. And maybe, just maybe, someone reading this or watching it now needed to be reminded that impact doesn't always come from being loud or powerful or famous. Sometimes it starts with saying yes to a mistake, to a shift you weren't supposed to work, to a person you didn't expect to meet. Sometimes it begins with handing someone a coffee or a second chance. And now it's your turn. If this story resonated with you, we'd love to know. Where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. And tell us, have you ever had a moment like this? A small act, a quiet place, a stranger who changed everything? Let's fill the comment section with the same kind of warmth this cafe gave us. No noise, just real people, real stories, and maybe a little bit of cinnamon. Thank you for being here.